Hello everyone, question and answer video today. Admit I want to relax every once in a while, so this is easier, but never mind. There are lots of questions that you pose me regularly, and I am mostly caught just by a few of them, because actually the simplest, most straightforward ones are the more interesting, the ones that allow me also to expand on different aspects, not just of what is entailed by the question, but like as a presentation for the channel, because I know that especially in recent times I've gained another consistent load of subscribers, and of course these are new followers, and I noticed that these questions also arise. Like some of you may be habituated to my channel rhythms that are objectively crazy to some extent, but it's also funny, right? I gotta tell you that. And I want to cover this question. It actually comes with a group of others that are all pretty similar. This was posted on yesterday's video about manual to roll. How do you even figure out what you want to cover on this channel, right? And some other questions are like, this was an answer to the same. How does he read to upload a 1 hour and more long video every day? That's massive. That's sort of connected. Here have lots of comments I can't find actually. Others asking, however, something like, how does he, does he actually do it, like in a material sense, like what's behind the scenes? Yes, I can. Well, okay, I just said it, but yeah, this guy asks. This is a long-term follower, by the way, how bro finds the time to eat / rest and further study while covering so much knowledge and unbiased opinion in these 1 hour, 2 hours, sometimes 3 hour videos. Rarely. I have a technical limit for which I can't upload a longer video than 3 hours. But in any case, it's another mind-blowing thing. Then I generally wonder if this is another answer. This is under the early Imperial Roman battle array video. I generally wonder how he does it. Has he ever done a behind-the-scenes video? I actually did. Like, if you go in the Easter Rain playlist, there is also old stuff, right? So it doesn't necessarily reflect what I do and believe now. But there you can see properly in fact, also the changes over time. And there are some videos dedicated to the channel per se, others in which I discuss my historical background, like the university, all the stuff, how to say write an article, stuff like that, or simply how I see history in general, like other things that I can express about current times. So for anyone new who is interested in Schwerpunkt history, if you get on that playlist, that I never publicized this enough. I have lots of different playlists, right? And I'm also working still to organize the whole system. Actually, I will make a big reveal, right? That I have actually created a Schwerpunkt site, and the reason actually being quite trivial. I'm not really good at laying out the pages, etc., but I discovered that through my transcripts, I can easily make, like in 3 minutes, a lengthy description of my own videos through AI, right? And since I don't have time to, like I used to do, if you remember, some of the oldest followers, like video descriptions, today I have just like the standard thing with the playlist that you can see there. Every day I used also to post them on Facebook groups. Then I stopped because I realized that I got so few traffic from it that it was not worth, like speaking of Facebook, of the pain. Also, let's be honest, like Facebook groups sort of died out a little bit, and there would be actually lots of things to say regarding this, also the future of YouTube and consequently of the channel at Similia. But also I didn't have unfortunately, because otherwise would have been a good exercise to write a proper description for every video, right? So now I figured out that just on the basis of what I say straight through the entire transcript that gets automatically generated when you upload the the video, you can use the sort of AI online tools, etc. You can produce this, and the objective of this is boosting the Google search views, because I noticed, if you remember my last channel update or something, I was pointing this out. There was a small but steady increase of views from the Google search engine, mostly due to the fact that probably my videos have started making like something like 500, 600 regularly views every day, and this gets the videos indexed by Google, sort of like it pushes that up. I mean, the site is already, like, when you put it out there, that immediately appear, but now they're rising in the list, in the search list. So there's something going on, and I thought that if I can write for, like, also for topics that objectively nobody covers, right? I'm aware to have made some videos on the internet, which is also connected with today's question, that literally nobody ever covered, which is not really like this huge deal, because at least if you are habituated to the kind of cultural misery in which we globally live, but I would point out some examples. For example, when I started the channel, I think I was the only person who had uploaded some videos together with Scholar Gladiatorian, incidentally, that contained migration era in the title, banally, or talk about the Franks or something. Now, of course, in the last years, there has been a partial blossoming of some sort of more researched topics, right? Not videos, unfortunately, because the content, I think, is always dramatically poor. Admittedly, these are smarter channels than mine as far as, views, clicks are concerned, which is, again, also connected with today's question. But I don't say it just for no reason. I do believe that the content is not good. I mean, sometimes it is good, but it's so brief and sort of shallow that I doubt that anyone who actually looks at the stuff gets the ABC right. Speaking of, the topic that it is actually covered, this, I think, is a very, very interesting field, even potential research. I don't think I'm ever gonna get into this stuff. Like, if I manage to go in depth to all the stuff I already covered in my doctorate for publications, I can't leave just out of rent with it. And Schwerpunkt, of course, is a nice integration with it. I will surely make at some point some videos from my articles, my even my speeches, and parts of my thesis, etc. I promise that I will make an entire series about the Battle of Markfeld for my master thesis, for example. The doctoral one can't quite be like in its entirety posted, because it's insane. And just like I will explain at some point why, because I sort of stopped the PhD Tales series that had started was almost 3 years ago when I finished that, and I there is actually a lot. Like, it can be an interesting exercise, but times are changing so fast, and especially with not much with AI, but I'm impressed with the general sort of moral temper that the world has acquired in the last years, that I'm like, as a historian, I'm mostly fascinated with the sort of general thing, and I'm partly addressing finally one aspect of the question. The criterion behind my choices is deeply intertwined with that broader vision, right? I know that for some, especially of the more distrustful elements out there, I may seem just like the crazy guy, like just like in the question says, how does he do it? Like, where does he find the time? You will be surprised to know that I have plenty of time to do plenty of things, including physical activity, of course, writing, and that's sort of my main activity going out there whenever I'm needed at uni, and even personal life. Surprise, surprise. Even though I admit I'm not a very sociable person in the first place. And Schwerpunkt has been really important. I don't deny that. I do spend hours every day working at it. It's not this hugely time-consuming thing. I mean, I decided to be, because I think that what I say every day, this format, in fact, needs to be told at some level. Some other level to be heard, which is, that on you rather, but it's also in fact depending on what I say and the way I say it. And that's why this question, as simple as it is and sort of hyperbolic with the even and so on, but it's sort of very relevant, because there is a philosophy behind what I do and how I do it. And so it's not just like fishing money, or sort of trying to break the algorithm to go viral, whatever. I must say that I'm getting closer to 20,000. By the way, I constantly thank you for, first of all, welcome to all the new subscribers, but just as a wall, right? The wall here again, 18,440 subscribers. Well, thank you for that, for the support. It's just like it's completely normal to have everybody watching, following, whatever. But it's just great. I think that these many people have manifested this much interest for Schwerpunkt, right? And I take some time to explain you better what I do in videos like this, because otherwise it becomes too impersonal. In fact, that's the point, right? I do, and of course deliberately choose to talk mostly about history, right? If you have been following from last autumn, I made some videos looking at those Reddit conversations that started on my channel that were, mostly focused on sort of like what's his ideology, well, how do we have to judge him morally, essentially, for what he does. And naturally, it's a very complex thing. I wouldn't like it to be like the first thing people wonder, or at least of course I deeply care about the moral implications of my work, and exactly for that I realized that making all these videos sometimes means that, of course, the overwhelming majority of the work is never going to be watched, even by the most affectionated followers. So there is that point. Like, I know what I upload, I know what's behind that, how it's built up, why I decide to talk about this or that, but it's not really necessarily what the average person watching is gonna get of it, right? Independently from any other variable that I know, like there is a specific profile of my audience, right? As sort of diversified as it is, really, in so many ways, but more or less we're looking at like, this is also a typical stat for YouTube, like 20, 30 years old US males, mostly. That's the thing. There is actually a consistent, like, 1/10 of the audience is women, and that's very interesting. There are also there is a consistent, like, 1/10 is elderly people, or more even, right? And there are lots of people in their 40s, in their 50s as well, which is sort of fascinating, because altogether they beat largely, even without sort of the 30, like my own age group, like they beat the younger one, right? One of the newer generations. It's also normal, not obviously because of me, but because of YouTube, because of how the internet developed. This is not like something you can't fully control yet, because you of course know very too well that the ultimate point of this is world domination. But let's leave this aside for now. Now, the and that's it's an interesting part of the story, because I often reference this. You have heard often the so-called cycle, right? So this is a literal, like, there are actually two cycles that I established now from a couple of years that count altogether, I think, like 34 chapters. Like, you can consider it as a whole. It's two cycles of 17 each, and altogether it's a big 34 cycle, plus some extras slash specials, right? That instead I deliberately pick, and or as I do follow some cyclicity. I'm very methodical, and I love routine, etc. So that's how it's reflected also in the way I pick the topics I like. Because objectively, in terms of self-actualization, it's difficult sometimes to say, well, that's hence the question that is very cognitively founded. How do you decide that? Like, you see all these topics that are sort of, again, part, as we will see now, of out of a determined basket. But of course, you do not. They're sort of different enough in kind to appear quite random, and they kind of are, because if you consider how much information I draw from for all these, even from the single elements of the cycle, and how I put like the information for the video together, like, it can seem crazy objectively. I already explained in some video how I do it. Like, somebody asked me, I think there is a video like this, like, how do you do it? And which is more about the technical side of the story, but others asking, like, well, what's the content about, what you have to expect, right? So today I will focus on the logic behind the single historical content choices, because you may wonder why, for example, I don't cover that much modern or contemporary history. I actually do cover much modern history, but only in specific ways and with a specific cut and whatever. Naturally, most of this gets down to the sources I use, because I have, at this point, a library of over 15,000 books, which I can access digitally. And I'm not talking about, like, public free stuff, right? This is all, like, some of the finest, most updated content that you can find, like, out there historiographically. So in a very condensed, very accessible fashion. So for every video, I have this. Every day it's another step of the cycle, and I know, say, I don't know, today I have to talk about Bronze Age warfare. Another one about, I don't know, some general. It depends on the elements of the cycle, the enemies of Rome, or the Crusades, or the Roman army, or early modern armies, or whatever, right? And in each of these smaller baskets in the cycle, I have plenty, like the equivalent of, I don't know, 200, 300 pages, sometimes even more, to choose from, like, some information. Sometimes they can be as long together as even a few tens of lines. Sometimes it's more, but the result being mostly the product of having this sketch on this given topic and then gathering as much information as from my library on that specific stuff. And it depends, like, I'm very sort of creative in the way I tend to sort of cut certain aspects, also because I could talk, given that enormous amount of information, about much more than what I actually do. Just to make an example, I have here, by the way, I have time to even advantage the videos. Here I have, that's the novel thing of this year, having a huge reserves of videos that are already prepared. I'm arrived here at 21 or more, actually. Had some sort of 25 videos ahead, or even more, I don't remember. Which means that even if for 25 days I don't prepare any video, I have all the capacity of making it once a day. And today I was preparing, spoiler, a bit about the early Imperial Roman signifer, right? The signiferi. And how much information is there about this. There are some, in order I have, at least I own directly. I could even search for more because the university sends me, of course, as I have my links, obviously, lots of scanned stuff. But just what I have, would be enough to make how many videos about the significary? 30, 40? Even just if I want to keep this under properly the format I make now, the level of depth I do now, because I could even go research sort of the most intensely detailed, hardcore sort of study on that, and then how many videos about the significary can we do? 100, 200? I'm serious about that. I have the capacity of doing this, and of course, by largely gluing this together and elaborating during the same video with all what I can think I have already done, I've already learned. People have asking me for sources and stuff, but say if I make a video, say on the the spiritual instances of religious reformation before the Gregorian reforms, well, I don't know, I studied enough of medieval history in my time to speak for that non-stop for, 2 hours in a row without needing any sketch in front of me, right? So at that point, what's the point of using sources in the first place? People tend to sort of underestimate how much you can memorize and just plastically build in your mind by studying certain topics for decades and simply being able to discuss them so easily, right? And it happens. If you get yourself at it, you learn how to do it. It's natural. It becomes with everything. At every step of the way, you sort of accelerate. And if you focus enough, after that it becomes like a child's play. And so everything that seems so, academic or scholarly or whatever. And of course, on YouTube, I keep it at a level that can be accessed really by anyone. If you accept that you must take into account also all the other videos I made, because I can't repeat everything at a point, and that's also what I think it's normal. If you look at somebody's work, you have to look at it comprehensively, and you can't quite get paranoid about, oh my god, where do you get this stuff? Well, even if I of course you do need to be some sort of expert. It's not that I'm an expert in everything medieval or anything historical, of course, but let's say having gotten those chevrons back in the day equates to know things that you can't really handle, and especially after you have been speaking for years, making over 2,000 videos, you will surely have the capacity of doing it. And actually, one of the reasons why I told history is also to show this, meaning that given the reality we're confronting every day, in a world in which, specific values are being undermined together with factual knowledge and moral and scientific foundations, and just because somebody's paying actively for destroying them, it takes much more to destroy than to build together, except at the end of the day you run out of resources yourself, and so there is not much you can do, rather than whining like most fellow conservatives and proper right-winger that, oh my god, our values are under attack, etc. Our values are not under attack. I mean, they are under attack in the mind of those who think that such values are damageable, right? Whereas what we should be concerned of is how weak single people are, especially in spending their entire time whining about, oh my god, there's a crisis of values, because, at the end of the day, it's also their fault. I prefer to be out here and speak history and show you how it's done, and simply, of course, having, as we'll see now, an ultimate goal, and of course influencing my choice criteria. And that is not just about that, but also about my own limits for that matter, and simply going on showing that if you want to understand anything of the world, you need those key values, you need those cornerstones without which you can't know history point. There's not an alternative view of history or another way of of doing it, right? You can have more or less different ideas, but like the sense of what history, especially in the minds of those who say, oh my god, it's useless to study humanities, we should all be engineers, and all this kind of mentally deficient, I don't know, but serious problems, as a matter of fact. It's sort of like you are like that, and you're so paranoid and weak and sort of passive aggressive because you do not know better, because you belong to that world that has been sinking from quite a while, and that pertains just to a specifically lower degree and section of society. I could be extremely political, right? For all those people who want to think that you can own someone because he has a bias, which is also a quite curious point, morally or scientifically. Like, is there a person who doesn't have bias? Because it seems like in the fiction of especially extremely biased people that lie all the time about hiding their own incredibly visible and macroscopically so ill intentions, like, it's not about the willingness of being biased or a strange, conspiracy theory behind, I don't know how we tell history or whatever. It's literally about being a fallen kind that makes you biased by definition. You do not need to be searching for that. So this does not excuse a lack of objectivity and the capacity of having that. The problem is that when you do not have that yourself, so you are behind in the ladder, you haven't gone there yet, of course you will not understand the difference. That's also completely normal. You cannot judge something that you do not understand. So I take my time to explain history, which is something that I believe, at least in my personal experience, was what, say, education could have done better. And also my background is completely different from most of yours, meaning especially those who come from the US. And I don't mean it like, I don't know, the usual European stuff. Oh, Americans do not have history, they are more ignorant. No, I don't believe that. I don't believe that specifically. It's not to say, of course, that there is anything particularly flattering about any world's country currently. In any case, the sense is that there is also a hierarchy of values, and so it's not more moral relativism that I'm searching for. Quite the opposite of it, which is another thing that triggers people, because the new strategy is mostly like, let's pretend that everybody has a relevance or equal relevance. To what end? Because you're paranoid that people can see that you're worthless as a person? Well, that's your problem, right? The equality may exist in an absolute sense, infinitely in potential. If in act you're a trash human being, it's your fault entirely, and you should be treated as such, right? So this is the reality of the world, and the world does not wait for you, fortunately. So the point is just trying and working and making the thing. So this apparently threatens like the little schemes of so many different individuals. I personally haven't like the fascinating thing is they haven't received much of this criticism at all, right? What I get on this channel is basically, and statistically, like something can be 98% positive feed, right? But whenever like behind the scenes things happen, and they try to make sense of my content, and that's the other painful thing, they fail. And I put this partly on me, because I if I explain myself better, of course, there is always a double threat there involved. But I'm also objective in the fact that, again, if, as I see from the stats and from everything, you don't even start focusing on what I say like in the first 2 minutes of the video and follow the entire thing, it's going to be extremely unlikely that you have any idea of the entirety of my work. Also because what you see here is just a part of it, meaning that, again, I work with what I say. I don't talk too much about what I specialize in on Schwerpunkt, but I also come from that and from lots of other things that I do not have time to discuss. So that's also partly the compromise of it all. The cycle helps me saying, like, every day I know what I have to do, right? And I may have a little option here and there with the specials, with some other series or mini-series or whatever. For example, a big one is the historical regional one that I specifically designed after the fact that, yeah, you can't start talking medieval stuff, but it's difficult to find what, in my opinion, as I matured as an idea over time, ever since I can remember, like if you study medieval or any kind of history in theory and you do not know what happened actually in every single place, right, at a given time, you will never be able to understand where that sort of theory comes from. And unfortunately, in fact, if you read different manuals of medieval history that are given to students everywhere, and that they will basically just read at the first year, especially if they are not going to go on with history, and also most people they don't, right, in the university years after the, I don't know, bachelor or a master, you will not have the palest idea of what any period in history actually is, right? And I actually would have liked to make a video explaining the different brain that develops after having specialized respectively in, say, ancient, medieval, modern, contemporary history, because those are completely different ways of approaching reality from the sources, with method, from the background, and then you get biased in one way or another. Of course, I am a medievalist by accident, almost. I told the story multiple times, so I will not repeat it. But I ended up, like, one thing that always fascinated me about the Middle Ages was exactly this sort of more localistic dimension, which I'm not like a fan of, for example, in a broader political sense. I believe in the empire, believe in also in that, but as far as federalism is concerned, and I'm not going to digress on this more than much, but the beauty, like the fascination of the Middle Ages is also the political fragmentation, right? So you want to really look at every single one of these pieces, because that's literally what who made the thing, right? If you study Roman history, it's just the Romans, right? It's not just the Romans, but it's sort of a unitary system with all its internal complexities and differences, no doubt, but you can follow that, right? And it's just also different time in history. You do not know so much about local history as much as you do for the Middle Ages, and the same is true from within the Middle Ages, certain parts of it or not. So actually, like, if I could start from this, which is a critical topic, because most people, I understand, come on my channel mostly attracted by the history of their own personal country. The purpose of doing this and talking about so many different places at once, given this question was posted under my recent, in fact, episode of Medieval to Roll for the historical regional series, it's not much the fact of flattering them for wherever they come from, but realizing what coming from there actually means, right? And why, in connection with all the other realities. In fact, that's mostly the point of my channel. It's not much about the single local specificities. It is, largely, and that's, again, what people want to know, because that's mostly for the Middle Ages, and also other times in history, what things get down to. Like, you can't just look at the, say, the maximum universal systems, right? But also how that piece does fit into the latter, right? And so what meaning does that have, right? For example, something that pushed me to make this specific choice of topics is exactly this. I mean, making people realize that until they know the whole, they don't know the whole, they will not be able to give an actual dimension to their own reality. This is what it's an obvious moral and scientific principle, but I see it even with people from other countries I talk to privately, for example, that for me it's extremely easy, of course, to know history in general, to think the world, to have sort of a global perspective, even if I don't talk much about it. I talk with people whose history I can't say I know, like in the most elementary manualistic notions I can throw into the conversation randomly. And these people are literally like, oh my god, but why do you know this? Well, because, I don't know, maybe knowing the basic elementary, like, school history of a major European country is what, like, every single human being with, with voting rights should know. And the question is, why don't you know that? And very often I know, of course, and actually it doesn't take anything, much better their own national history than anything that will ever get into themselves. And this painfully happens even to people who have apparently some sort of historical interest. And that's actually the first mover, like the first thing that makes me say, look, don't care too much about this confrontational aspect, because you tend to sound like an a-hole saying, oh my god, you're just basically a bunch of ignorants would not know even the countries that they live in. Yes, I was lucky to travel, I was lucky to study this stuff, but essentially, I realized that if I hadn't given a damn about history, I would have not known anything. Right? People who travel for a lifetime and know absolutely nothing about anything that they've seen around. And I could relate, even coming from the place where I come, where you do get actually lots of tourists around, from which you can witness this thing. But I think that's in fact the point. Like, simply even skipping that confrontational dimension and simply talking the history of these places and cumulating that and coming back on it and looking at other aspects and expanding that and connecting it with others. I think this is the best service I can render, first of all, to myself, because honestly, like, it's not that I make much from the channel now, but in terms of notions, like in general historical mind openness, I got much more from this than basically anything I received at university. At university, you can have like that exam for which you have to study 3-4 books and attend the classes and sort of being proper about certain things, but nobody, like, those are punctiform things. You will do that 30 times, right? And that's a lot, and that's the structure that, especially in the methodological sense, you're supposed to be receiving. But when you're done with that, unless you do something like I do here, which is crazy, and again, nobody does, I've never seen anyone on YouTube doing anything like this myself, you will never get the sense, like, you can know the entire medieval history more or less, like, because again, I'm not an expert on, like, the overwhelming majority of stuff I discuss, but the comparative, like, exercise, the ability of remembering, of course, all the stuff you have seen and being able to put them in perspective do give you, like, a qualitative knowledge concerning the single objective historical notion, right? It makes it objective in the process, right? And so this is what, again, comparative and diachronic view, that this is what you lack at this point in history, not just in historical education, but pretty much any field that I know of, right? Hard sciences are a complete disaster. Humanities are a complete disaster. It's like, this is not the place where to criticize heavily on those, but I do understand people that are sort of weary, like they are distrustful towards the concept of expertise, because even though it's a very dumb thing to pretend, because that's the next step usually, like that you know better than the expert, which you don't, right? And at least one expert can be wrong, but you do not have that broader capacity as a confronted to, the entire scientific community as a whole. And independently from what other people like journalists may filter from that being that, and objectively nobody really does, and that's also the other problem. You do need, right? You you do need to have this kind of background in order to really just be reliable to yourself. I mean, the reason why I'm out here and I apparently don't give a fuck about anyone, which is also pretty much a good part of my character, is exactly this. I'm doing this primarily for myself, and I incidentally give it, like I sell it to you. I, in exchange, just give you time and some ads, right? As a demand. But which is a lot, and don't get me wrong. I understand also YouTube's policies. Yes, the income is meager, but it's also like, again, YouTube is not an academia. That's a point I made also in other instances. But yet, in general, I think that's the best thing. Like, if I really benefit from this exercise and I really get this kind of information that really and consistently proves my historical knowledge, because I come to test this eventually in my field constantly, and it does seem to me to this point to simply outmaneuver most other sort of historically pseudo-intellectual attitudes, also from the same academia, same scholars I work with. Well, why not being out here and telling it to people, right? I don't care about anything else. It's just it can be a way of making things work, and to even profit from it. So for mutual benefit, because again, there is nothing wrong in profit whatsoever. You see, this is the point. Like, you do profit because there is no such thing like profit without something that works right? And working right doesn't mean what subjective issues are. Like, because you can have a subjective perspective, but you're still a person in the world, and you cannot fool reality, right? There are people who objectively make a lot of money by exploiting people's deficiencies at all levels. Especially the historical one, it is immediately translated in a political sense, and not in the way that usually like populists, forecastators, conspiracy theorists, people who, I don't know, think that they can understand war without having, studied von Clausewitz or having reconstructed a campaign with all the sources, and think that they can't tell you what Russia and Ukraine do all the time, because that's their, there's such deep experts. There's especially the realists, they tell you like it's like this now, like just like skipping one of the single most fundamental aspects of the Clausewitzian theory. There is also the unpredictability of certain outcomes in so many, because of specific dimensions of warfare. That are always political in the definition. So also, how do you quantify a moral force? Well, that's something you have to explain, right? But let's skip this aspect, right? It is all with one, because that I, for example, made the von Krieger series back in the day, and that did not work because it taught exactly how to do strategic analysis, and of course people were not interested. Because as soon as they understand that a mediocre intellect has nothing to do with that, and that you must actually spit blood and sweat tears to understand even a minimal part of it, of course they bail out. Because that's the average person today. Like, there's no doubt. We all the indicators educationally, psychologically, like in terms of properly of output of our civilization, is out there. It's the world of the lesser people now, right? It's now just the average first world person is sinking into some sort of second world standard that has remained there, by the way. It has even been worsening, telling the truth, in terms of individual quality, not gone up, and feeling that somebody has betrayed them in the process, when it's fundamentally their problem, their fault, also because they have never been so advantaged materially in the entire history of mankind. I know that some of you disagree with this, especially when people say, "Oh my God, the student loans and whatever." Like, there are ways and ways of doing things. Also, unfortunately or fortunately, like for depending on who you're talking about, not all the world is the United States, and I can tell you that while things go wrong in many ways, of course, they've never gone better, and so we have to really be able to distinguish, and this is what history does, that the relative from the absolute, and not making moral relativism to be the usual victim and loser of the situation. So, in other words, I already have, in any case, all these works scheduled, which I will not give you the examples, not to spoil what I'm going to upload in the next days, but I'll tell you just more or less the topics that alternate. I have, and I decided this out of quantities. I could even make the list of this. Renaissance armies, for example. I could digress for each of these by saying, why do I think that these are important? It's all about building that entire profile, right? Studies on the roots of chivalry, right, and how sort of the process came to be. All this material, by the way, is usually unsatisfactory for me. As I was saying before, like, I integrate the information always with plenty of other information, and I often say it like correcting even things that I'm reading, because I don't believe in the opinions of specific scholars. I tend to get, if you realize how I make the videos, especially about medieval warfare, like single elements as indicators of something I've already seen, not in the sense of, I don't know, the usual dumb comparisons that people normally do at a political, strategical level, like saying, I don't know, this indicator about this knightly equipment part and its development, its appearance, or its representation in a certain way, tells me about this specific regional context, that this is knowing also the historical background, the saying what is actually going on with that, how to connect it, how to essentially explain this in a way, and it always works. Like, they are guesses, but they always fit. Like, you never see something that is opposite to that in all the other indicators, and that's why I love history, because it's real. You don't have to make up one for what happened in the past. The evidence is clownously telling about what happened in the past, right? This is, for example, yet another reason why I make this video, is to transmit actually a positive, let's say, attitude towards history. Like, an enormous much of historical content out there on the internet today is made out of paranoia, relativism. We do not know what happened. There's no way to know, or it's just a huge, like, we have to understand the perspective of the thing. Damn, there is a history. Like, try to understand what was happening politically, strategically. It's either in one way or another, right? Of course, you have to understand the system. You have to have worked on it. And the reason why I think that most content out there sucks in that way is that, of course, first of all, we all know that God knows how to define the sketches. It's just basically all catchy, stupid cliches from specific rhetoric from Anglo-Saxon historiography from the 1970s and 1980s with structuralistic stuff. Like, I don't... It's always the same old story, unfortunately. But I can immediately see, even if that had been actually written by a competent historian, where they're coming from with that, and what kind of homework they haven't done. Right, this is extremely easy. When you interrogate someone, right, you can immediately understand from the attitude, the words, the tone, what is that they actually mean, and whether they're faking it, knowing something or not knowing something, where they're taking the information, what kind of their mental process really is. It's not much that I do this for a living. It's that it's once you have sort of stored that information and ipso facto critically ordered it, there's no way you can't miss where the stuff is coming from, right? So I do this constantly with the same material I have. I can't think of a historian that, like, some historians I like for the method that they use, but I came to differ extremely for any scholar that I've ever met. Never had a single, of course I specialize in my field. For the rest, I trust scholarship. Again, I can't know it all, whatever, but in general, like, the questions you pose yourself in a certain field, methodologically, can be reflected in others. We can immediately understand whether, I don't know, my arch enemies like the socio-economical studies are telling you something just extremely, deterministic or materialistic in their relativistic structuralism, because they want to show that, oh my god, we have this terrific scientific means and we can know everything just by making it a number, right? And so if you can't do that, well, we do not know. We need more researches and perspectives to truly understand what was going on. There are some, like, I don't know how many forests have been cut down for printing books that are exclusively about this circular nonsense that just makes people ever less knowledgeable, ever more confused, and ultimately are also very, very boring. Like, let's be honest, like, evidential history, the single finest, most beautiful, engaging, entertaining history of all, politics, warfare, right? Whenever you meet the guy who says, because you see, I would like to understand what the daily life of a peasant really was. How did he build his house? I mean, if you are playing video games, right, settled in, again, for reasons of psychological escapism, because you think that it's normal in your worldview that a person sort of segregates itself in the wilderness, magically supporting his or herself, as if the rest of the world did not exist, and that's the only rest of the world. I can already say that you're a mentally deranged person, socially. There is nothing easier than understanding somebody's political opinion by just asking them, what's your favorite historical topic? Right? Always. Like, it's not even to be like, it's not that you have to spot the political party involved, but just like orientatively, what field they're interested in. You can immediately understand what sort of, where they are in their lives. It's a matter of how they phrase that and whatever. Like, every interest is legitimate. Like, if even for the, say, every knowledge is useful, right? So that we do need people who study history of economics. We do need people who study history that, again, was traditionally hijacked by Marxistic influences at best, meaning that the worst is actually are straight communists, let's say. But let's say if this is articulated with an important degree of complexity, and you see what's happening in a community in a higher sense, like I don't know, my tutor was never really understood what her full political thing was, but I worked with her for a long time. She's a famous professor. She has in fact, like a great background, a great curriculum. She wrote, she studied, she researched greatly, and you read her books and you understand, yes, she may say every once in a while something you do not like politically when you talk with her, if she ever does, because we never really had that problem. We like one another. But, when she writes history, that's serious history, right? And that's a dimension that the average person today has properly completely missed. Like, most people buy books or start following certain figures just because of it. This is valid even for my channel to an extent, just because they project on them things that are comforting even their own insecurities, or they're thinking, again, this person is doing it for this reason. If people fully knew what the things I believe, probably they would never follow me, even when they are because they're even maybe beyond the ultra version that they think I am, and they don't understand to which point this is true. I inserted this general histories of warfare. I'm sort of exhausting about the entire Eurasia, right? Saying just the video I made the other day, for example, about Scottish warfare between the 11th to 14th century. Like let's look at a wall. We can't talk about various Scottish panoplies or tactics or whatever, but let's sort of think of the entirety of Scotland. Where were they at, right, in terms of like their neighbors? How did they develop? I think this is a very interesting perspective, and that's also when you have to give grades in a way, right? I'm very sensitive to the concept of civilizational development. I believe that most people get it completely the other way around. Like mostly, doesn't matter whether you're right or left wing. If you come from the fourth estate, you will unavoidably start thinking in the aforementioned way. That is, that the average person is actually valuable and they're actually martyrs of the situation. That everything is always against them, and so the world magically grows with them being always oppressed and exploited or whatever. Which, of course, is a quite suspicious explanation, to say the least. It's similar, right? I am, I think, stern but fair with my evaluations. I mostly take pride in this comparative capacity, and again, seeing it also over time, and it's not easy, right? But given that nobody really does it, sometimes I feel like I'm at least trying. Right, and it does seem to me that what I say, also because the more I do it and the better I can evaluate, I can dimension, I can compare, I can sort of realize what the indicators are. Also, in a time in history that is not radically complex to the point that you can't sort of compare two systems because it's too difficult. Right, this can become difficult at some levels of contemporary history, but not even, because at that point, yes, it's crazy just to be able to be an expert on a single minimal concept, but you do have some more reliable indicators. You do have some accessible, non-filtered raw data you can use at Similia. As I said before, I also decided to enter the Bronze Age. Mostly for warfare. There is this divide sometimes in the content, like between something I discussed just militarily. Basically, just for the Middle Ages, I think I cover general history, right? For ancient, modern, contemporary, I just talk military stuff, right? So that's an important divide in my content, I think. And that's, of course, reflecting my specialization, but what can you do? And I've been liking Bronze Age because up to a couple of years ago I didn't really know too much. I knew about the essentials, of course, of Bronze Age warfare, but like in the details, it's important, especially to dimension there how in a fundamentally very poor time in history you can't see small things making huge differences, and that's also really helpful because it makes you see all the rest of history where differences are much bigger, like how in that sense big they are comparatively, and how unpredictably, let's say, large the world sort of gets at some point. It's a great exercise. Then I inserted, of course, like I gave it enough time. It's never quite enough about early, high, and especially late medieval warfare in different ways. I tried to cover in depth like everything. Militarily speaking, organization, tactics, talking armies, of course, units, single units, but I mean all aspects. It can be the mounts, it can be artillery. So I think that's also very useful because it makes you understand what I do not even know sometimes even how looking at a single unit can, unless it's elite or something, like can make you picture some things, but like especially in terms of material culture, right? The most important things are battles, fundamentally. Those really show you how they fight. That's what I specifically specialize in my field. I reconstruct 13th, 14th century battles. That's what I do for a living. And that's actually the single most important thing ever. People fixate with mostly arms and armor. Like most medieval warfare content on YouTube revolves around HEMA or reenactment, certain figures that are just LARPers fundamentally, not even. They do not really have a specific historical competence. I see enormous limits in whatever they do. Right? Actually, I am toying with the idea of making a video literally listing all the exclusively negative experience that I had in my life with HEMists and reenactors. This is not to say that there aren't good people or that what they do is useless, but you will understand when I make that video. And I think that does have some sort of educational value, because in many ways it seems to me that in the last decades, today, that with a bit of crisis, people are reverting to, like, I think there's been some sort of decline in these activities. I mean, don't get me wrong, I do think that this thing may have grown in the world, but not, I mean, quantitatively and not much in relative terms. I think surely in the West it's sort of declined in some way. And it was an age specifically. It was the age of Facebook groups, of forums, of people that had to act there like manly and trying to pretend that they were experts in warfare. And again, they thought, like, you know, what does happen if I keep an army with this weapon and another army with this army? So a complete alienation from any trace of reality. But nobody ever explained it to them. And so they sort of nested also with that sort of exhibitionistic, which I find also an incredibly feminine thing. I mean, I don't understand what a man's purpose is in dressing up, exhibiting, showing off. Like, of course, if it is something very, like, competitive, like some HEMA branches are, or I don't know whether they're technically HEMA branches, but, you know, there's things like Burhurt, etc. can be sort of interesting in that regard, but not even that has anything to do with actual medieval combat by any trace of, you know, moral or capacity of cultural values or motivation. You don't get to kill people in the first place. You may say, oh, but maybe it's a tournament. Well, but then so what, right? People make it pass from, I understand how armies worked because I beat myself with another guy on an arena for reasons that, of course, have nothing to do with, say, a 15th century man-at-arms. And, of course, they never studied how armies work on the field. They just have this simplistic, materialistic, deterministic, technologistic sense of, if I use this weapon, maybe, I don't know, it will help the army. Like this kind of level of things. I research and reconstruct battles exactly from all the sources available to reconstruct the entire engagement. And of course, what matters in those things is completely different than what most of this fantasy attempts at best try to do. It has, of course, mostly to do with moral forces, with command decisions, with how the battle lines operate. That there are often, you know, just also very symmetrical, conventional, homogeneous engagements in many ways. So the way medieval warfare worked is something that I've never seen really popularized at any level, nor on YouTube, nor on TV series, whatever. Like, people think that historically accurate medieval stuff is just a guy, you know, that paid somebody for dressing him up like something that looks like more or less like the century. That it wasn't, that becomes a military historically accurate content, even if battle scenes are utterly disgusting, like, you know, starting from Vikings to Outlaw King, like pure rubbish. And if you think that that's not the case, that's the problem right there, because you too well know that even if you think that, it's because you do not actually know. You're a person who does not the sources. You don't, because if you did, you wouldn't believe that, and you wouldn't by a large extent. So I do that for a living, can immediately spot that when you support that, or the way you try to do it. And we haven't taught people, in fact, to shut up when they do not actually know the story, right? I haven't spent a great time of Schwerpunkt doing this, but I think that In fact, as I was saying at the beginning, if you go into, say, the My Battles playlist, you will see what battles were actually like, and how do we know that? Like from the actual evidence, and what kind of evidence, and how to put it together. What does that mean? What kind of quantities are involved? What kind of data is involved? So that's something which I personally care extremely about. But of course, you must know everything, right? So from fencing to material aspects, just know that these are, however, some of the least relevant in absolute terms by scale, and absolutely undecisive in order to have a military historical competence, right? It's like, if you have never studied von Clausewitz, if you're one of those people who think that Sun Tzu is actually, you read Sun Tzu, how many he must have met that believe, I've read Sun Tzu, I understand war, man. Yeah, and you don't even know what von Clausewitz is, and you say, but no, well, but it's Sun Tzu, man. Yeah, because you can't compare work of the kind of Pythagoras with one of the kind of Hegel, and just a list of absolutistic and also contradictory prescriptions with a morally and scientifically cogent system to explain what war is. Well, if you're not even able to dialectically formulate this kind of statements, I will not take you seriously, whatever you do, right? And I've learned this over time, because you see, the beauty of this is that when you are younger, you do give a chance to people, right? I was about to marry an archaeologist who was extremely into these kind of things, and she was kind of crazy, and that's like maybe my thing, that like 3/4 of the women I got involved with had mental disturbances of sort, and I mean it in a actually serious sense. I mean, talking clinical here, but at the beginning, you do want to believe in them, right? Then you understand that you actually already knew that at the time, but you want it to be nice. The things are not the way you want them if they aren't that in reality, right? That's something that history teaches you really the hard way. I will not start my feud against archaeologists. Of course, predated my failed, say, fortunately, I didn't get married, but say it's something that I was willing to, and fortunately did not happen at that point. In any case, like this choice I've made, also integrating, for example, Roman history. That's a hell of a choice, right? Because I haven't done. Actually, yes, I was wrong before. I was saying that I don't do basic manualistic history, but for the Middle Ages, no, I do it for Roman history. The reasons are complex. Before I was telling you how I am medievalist by accident, I wanted to study Roman history at the beginning. And again, I will not tell the story why I wouldn't, but I thought, and the more especially I studied the Middle Ages and I got into Holy Roman Imperial stuff and the Renovatio Imperii and the entire mystique of universalism and so on, the more I got back to Romanity, and I understood Romanity much better actually from the Middle Ages, like at least coming from the Middle Ages, than I did by studying Roman history, because the way that's the point, that the way they teach you Roman history normally has nothing to do with that mystique. They presented you Roman history, Greek history as the democraticistic, sort of statalistic, republicanistic, whatever, sort of we're all equal, multicultural society. Oh my God, look at the technology of it, and missing completely the point of world domination by our beloved imperial Catholic tradition, the chosen people of Rome, and the world domination, which is actually also a much easier way to teach factually Roman history without too many mental jerk-offs, telling the truth. Also because that's entirely what every people believed at the time for themselves, if they were able to get somewhere, and still was believed in the Middle Ages, where we were starting to be a bit more crippled in a moral sense. But again, I will not digress on this either. But that's, for example, a huge part. Also, the content that I would like to make that I'm still not. I have started here and there, but I still have to properly put together more seriously. I have things going on in my life right now that make me think, oh my god, I have to stick to the cycle, because at least I can salvage, I can advantage some time, and I need to be a bit more, say, stable for specials, but I will talk about it in the end. So I talk Roman history, the entire Roman history, the Crusades. Yes, they are a chapter within high late medieval warfare, but you want to dedicate yourself to that. You do talk also about Islamic warfare that is objectively important. Of course, I have mostly a Western European focus and perspective and bias, you can argue, but I sort of explain that sort of developmental, compared, and diachronic view why I think that's also necessary in the world, and it's starting not to become to be popular anymore. But actually, the reason why I make videos is also to show how relevant it is, and how certain things are really not a matter of opinion. Then I had to introduce something about classical Greek warfare, so I included the Achaemenids with the Greeks, the Persian wars, etc. Like that. Those are really necessary, and they're a very interesting topic, because we know, especially about that time, more even than the Hellenistic ones, so many detail about, after all, such a long time ago, and this is just because the Greeks started for the first time to write history in a specific way that allows us to see that. So it's also a very important methodological exercise. Hellenistic warfare, the rise of Rome, looking at the various contendants in Mediterranean, in Europe, is crucial. I really needed this up to India, because that's really the scope. I'm brutally fascinated with Hellenistic warfare, and I started with that in many ways. I mean, I started more with Roman warfare, telling the truth, but over time, like, I got pretty fascinated with Hellenistic warfare, and I would like actually to talk much more about it, because some of you would be surprised. Like, if you're surprised by what I do, I would like to shock you with showing you what I actually know and I don't talk about, because really what I discuss, even because of the cycle as a constraint, is much beyond even the random distribution I give to these topics. But again, it's easier if you stick to a topic. You don't spend all the information all at once. This was a concern at the time. I started Schwerpunkt just talking about sort of plain medieval history. I remember it was my first year of university manual that I resumed. I started making videos on that. And then I realized, I have to talk about military history. I even told you at the time, like, and I thought I would exhaust that. Instead, I took off, and now realize that, of course, I will die before I will ever manage to complete the cycle, in many ways. Then, part of my interests, for reasons that now also have to do with my travels, with etc., has to do actually with early modern warfare. If I hadn't studied the Middle Ages, crossing out the Romans that at the beginning were not available, I would have probably specialized in 17th century warfare. This is not even to say that I talk too much about that, but I had to find some material that I think was relevant. I concentrated a lot on, for example, the Siege of Vienna of 1683, also on Prince Eugen at the beginning, but then we will maybe come back on that topic. But I have to restructure a bit my sources, my general information, because I would like to make it better and definitive. But a bit like the entire passage, this sense of modernizing phase, like looking at the dark phase of the Renaissance, right, from the late Middle Ages to the to the 18th century and discovering a bit that taste of, not necessarily of antiquarianism, but knowing all the various also literary references, the great names, the great treatises, also the technicalities of warfare at the time, its darker sort of ragamuffin aspects, right? That quite difficult time that the 16th, the 17th, the 18th century really were, and the sense of the death of chivalry and modernization, secularization in the process, right? You seem to like especially those videos I make on the early modern soldiers that for some reason get more views than anything else, even though they're very generic sometimes because they don't focus necessarily on that. I never understand, I must confess that some aspects of the audience taste is it's not to say it's not interesting, but I mean there are many more interesting topics that get regularly skipped in terms of views, so I'm pretty surprised sometimes. The same goes for the Middle Ages. I mean, covering the Middle Ages is not just a matter of those details, etc. You must understand sort of even there the social background, a bit the economical background of warfare, strictly speaking, for which there is really a lot, right? If you want to study that, you're going to find plenty of information. Then I thought that looking at the enemies of Imperial Rome was quite relevant, right? Making a focus, as we'll see now, on the Roman army. That is another element of the cycle, but looking at also how this intertwined with the enemies during the Roman conquest, etc. Recently made a video about Brittonic warfare that is essentially dedicated to that, for example. With these we go at sort of a slower pace because it's not that I upload the stuff that often. It can happen. A single one of these topics is really happening once over more than a month, without considering the specials into the account. So it's complicated. As we've seen, early medieval warfare, there is all a progression. You see, passing also through the Byzantine army at some point. Again, some topics, just by all these various steps, all these various baskets of the cycle, sort of happen more often by deliberate choice of mine. It's all very alchemically calibrated. This was one side of the cycle. The other side of the cycle is sort of more experimental. It has to do in many ways with a lot of basic medieval history stuff. Like sometimes like you want to talk about some specific topics that are mostly some aspects of certain dynamics happening in this specific place in the Middle Ages. It can be everything. It can be political, religious, economical. You must understand the Middle Ages as this enormous tapestry of events that you again have to be able, however, to read as a whole, right? And this is extremely important because it's as if these aspects of, I don't know, war, single units, battles, etc., were grafted on a more solid basis, right? Something that is just a bit behind the scenes. I don't upload about it that often either, but it is present. It must be felt. These are also mostly my reminiscences from university. Any kind of work that sort of explains even the social background. I must confess that, I don't know, rural history is quite fascinating. The peasantry, its instances, its autonomy, there are all things you must study if you want to be especially a true medievalist, because even if structuralism really sort of hijacked it in many ways, there are so many good studies, and some, in fact, not being really from that background and actually criticizing the same and making you see things in perspective, and also teaching you how to think in a bit the bigger terms, making you understand where historiography is at today with it. For example, like, what do we think about European demography during the Middle Ages? Where are we at? What kind of aspects can we point out? What kind of dimensions can we give? I mean, some fundamentals must be reaffirmed, must be based, right? Then once I inserted a branch of the, another basket of this part of the cycle, because one user, but we were, I think, in 2019, asked me about, or 2020, I think, juridical history, the history of law, right? And we came almost to an end. Actually, the next chapter will be the last, because I exhausted most of the basics. Again, as I was saying at the beginning, we could make this channel exclusively about medieval law, right? And there is so much about it, but we have to condensate in a way that is accessible. Also because, I loved studying law, even though I didn't really, it was a hard exam back in the day at university, but it somehow explained me so much that, especially when it gets to state building, you sort of give for granted how did these countries work. It's from that you come to appreciate institutional history to an unprecedented level. I think after all these years making videos about medieval history, one of the things that people still don't get is obviously how politics works, how states are built, and how they work effectively and positively. Because of the usual distrust towards government that at the end of the day rests on the decisive moral majority of any community, there's no such thing like, a government stands because there are a few guys that control. It can happen if the moral majority is monopolized by a few people, are so good and the others are so weak, right? But it's still about those people that could be so strong and they aren't, right? It's not materialistic. Their responsibilization. This is what they still teach in, at least in authoritarian regimes, and especially of socialist or post-socialist matrix, because that's the responsibilization, somebody else's fault, or the government will take care of it. We have nothing to do with it. Typical, for example, Russian mentality, like if you have talked with Russian serially, that they say all exactly literally the same identical phrases that are the same ones used by Bolshevik ideology to responsibilize people. And so you can understand so much from that. As well, admittedly, we didn't talk too much about Slavic law. That would be interesting, just because, if you study at least medieval law at university, mostly it's just about Latin Germanic Europe, because it's also the better documented and obviously the more relevant even for the later state building of modern times. Then, speaking of Western Europe, at some point I said, well, I can't just go on with historical regional episodes to tell the history of specific countries. It seemed to me that through this cycle, that, as you understand, is really crowded and thus random, the more stuff you add. Of course, there would be some countries that are fairly represented, others that you talk about less, and or at least that never come up in a sort of more consistent sense. Now, I inserted a series, 3 series, respectively dedicated to France, Germany, and Italy in medieval times. These have been incredibly useful to properly stiffen the, say, Schwerpunkt's backbone regarding the history of Western Europe, and they're tremendously useful for expanding further. Also in other countries, as a matter of fact. The previous sort of manualistic content is really infinite. I have so much stuff, and again, I compose this every time. I can't really talk about everything, but that does cover adequately most of usually Western Europe. I wish we'd talk more about Northern Europe, for example. Also some aspects of at some parts of southern Europe, but overall, the core is well represented. There's a basket dedicated to the Byzantines as well. It's just I decided to do it emperor by emperor because it seemed like the most solemn way of sort of restoring the memory of Constantinople in its again the solemnity of the ritual, the centrality of the Sebastocratic rule of these monarchs, and that works well. I don't know. I've made so many. I don't know. I don't think I'm going to exhaust the basket in a while, but I understand that when I finish that, I don't know how to substitute it. I could have to invent something. Like I could even go with that, because I didn't do, say, in the historical region series, I concentrated on everything in Europe except the Byzantines. So even though that's a unitary power, we could find a way to make the various themata, for example, or that there are also successor states. We will see about that, because also the regional series is not infinite. We're going to exhaust certain regions, right? And so you have to move on, and there is a vast field geographically to do so. But as I will explain to you later, I also have something else in mind to keep talking about the same areas. Then, exactly for this, I decided I had to insert something about Chinese warfare and the general East Asian, partly overlapping with Central Asia as far as the history of warfare regional series were concerned. It turned out to be great, honestly. Chinese warfare is very fascinating, and I think that expanding the dimension of geographically of Schwerpunkt's coverage is really crucial to explain what I was telling before. I mean, people are interested in this comparison sometimes. What about the Romans versus China or this kind of stuff? I don't say there is some space for that in a legitimate sense, not in the usual one it's often presented like. But one of the most important things is definitely to stick to these areas sort of in a equally dimensioned way. For example, I think I never made a video about Japanese warfare, right? And think about how relatively disproportionate the attention towards the samurais is in pop culture, or versus the Vikings even. This is not now just about the Asian basket, and how actually relevant they were, or at least how much compared to other peoples that you have never even heard of, and that were actually much more important to some degree. I'm not talking mostly the Japanese, but I mostly think about the Vikings. I mean, let's be honest, the more you study the Viking era, what was happening in continental Europe, the more you realize the disproportion of how more important that the latter really is compared to anything the Vikings ever did. And it's not to say to diminish what the Vikings ever did. In fact, I would like to talk more about them, as I was saying before, mostly referring about that, but not only. Because, for example, later medieval Scandinavian history is beautiful, but people don't care. Like, I managed to cover some of it in the original series, but it's legitimately less, right? There were less people, there were sort of less developed. This applies also to Eastern Europe as a whole, but again, covering also the entire Eurasia to eventually fill certain gaps coming from the other baskets, like it can be useful. As you see yesterday, I'm making a series about naval warfare, mostly for ancient and medieval times. Recently I made a video about galley warfare in the early modern era, and surely I have to find a way to expand on say different ships of the line and like even beyond, like up to ideally have to arrive to the 21st century. I mean, Schwerpunkt doesn't have chronological limits, right? We talk about prehistorical warfare, but it's also very difficult to some extent. So it also becomes complicated because of the methods involved, etc. But so far, I think we've been covering a fair amount chronologically. I really wanted to study more, as we've seen, the Siege of Vienna, so I talk about that sort of often. At some point, I wanted to conceptualize a bit more warfare from the 16th to the 18th century. So aside from, let's say, the Renaissance armies or some broader cultural reference and philosophy about the development of modern warfare, you want to get things straight in terms of how things actually worked. That video about galley warfare, for example, was from this, like what was in simple words, but concretely that about, right? You have to explain that in order to show that you really know the fundamentals. Without that, you can't present yourself even as a serious historian. Then I inserted, as a last, a series about the city of Rome from literally ancient to contemporary times, which I have blended in pretty well, I think, and that has always very interesting, let's say, points to explore, even just properly the fabric of the city, like the churches, the monuments. There's really a lot of stuff going on there but politically, primarily, that people don't get, right? To most people, the entire history of Rome and its sort of universal relevance, etc., ends with the Roman Empire, right? There is this general sense that the Romans ended. Now let's talk about just Northwestern Europe. All the rest does not exist. No, that's not it. Not that Northwestern Europe is not important at all. Actually, just these days I've been preparing something more probably about British history, because I think that it in spite of the cycle that is fairly varied, it went neglected, oddly enough. There's always so much you can do at different points. Speaking of further content that I would like to make, like what's this going towards? So just to remain in line with the question, I'm taking lots, not of tangents, but I'm digressing on certain aspects that are of course important. How do we even figure out what I want to cover? Well, from a couple of years, I've really been fascinated with the occult, but meaning like the real occult, not what's like people think that the occult is, that is anti-Christian sort of sorcery or whatever. It's quite the contrary. It's the occult, read forgotten imperial Catholic tradition that has actually a lot of continuity exactly within Christendom. As the closest thing, you can't find it in the contemporary world. This is mostly history of religions. As I often say, I do actually have a background in history of religions, and I would like really to talk about it much more often than I do. The reason why I don't is that, honestly, like covering mostly military, political, and social history, and that level of ecclesiastical history that is blended in just medieval and the medieval one, made me realize that I should take things step by step. It's also a very complicated story when you want to make actually occult history, so it's religious history. That is to say, you can't pick like a manual of history of religions and going by that. We could. I actually wanted at the beginning. But then I realized that religion is taught in a way that, in a historical sense, that is usually very categoristic, and that betrays properly the ultimate universal meaning of the same. And it's not to say the differences are not important. I know that there is a florid niche on YouTube that is mostly like, I don't know, criticizing Islam, considering the massive, to say the least, when not disastrous, aspects of immigration, not even just the legal one. And I understand that. And most of the Christian history content I make is designed to maintain like people's interest in understanding Christianity. I also make Islamic history. I don't have any problem with that. I mean, I don't, in this sense, I'm not biased in the way people think I am. I could easily steer towards, okay, let's make populistic, like what people want to hear, just in a simply, you see, I am beyond ultra far right wing, far beyond, right? So if I made ultra right far wing content, I would think like I would just be making content for children, and as such, I don't think that I can approach history of religions, but from a dimension that is extremely difficult to prepare for, because it does literally require some sort of initiation that I've been. Well, okay, let's skip this aspect. But to make the long story short, I may be coming with that up again. This is nothing extremely sort of controversial. I mean, I made videos about the Sol Invictus, about sacred regality. I made all the Indo-European sort of basic intro of the various cycles, the rise and fall of them. Those were just like appetizers, but they were also quite appreciated, and so I think that I should continue like that. And the reason why I haven't from last autumn is rather that I had personal problems that fortunately I resolved. I may have some environmental ones soon, but I have actually 2 places to stay. Like I don't have any problem like in terms of continuing. And in case of emergency, I can easily continue the cycle, because it does take moral resources to be calm, rested, and sort of well disposed to think about what we have to say for those videos. But I actually have an enormous amount of that. Actually, Schwerpunkt could and would be known more for that than probably the military historical content. And the reason being that I deeply believe in this religious, let's say, want to be extremely powerful in terms of, if you tell that, you sort of will start really solving people's problems. I know how people think that, oh my god, Jordan Peterson changed my life. And Jordan Peterson is the sort of vanilla secular lay modern version of this. Like it has nothing of the grandeur and the mystique, the sort of the depth and the traditionality of that. Like it's not just making biblical exegesis, that you actually understand the point of these cultures, that you need history. And for some odd reason, Anglo-Saxon conservatism does not have much much historical interest. In the first place, they act mostly by theory. It's a sort of pseudo-philosophical like attitude. It's like when Cambridge and Oxford began to think that they were, the direct successors of classical Greece, right? But something good came out of it, but not excessively, unfortunately. Like we all failed after the empire, of course, but in general, again, we have to regain this. I was thinking, in fact, that, but it's not for this video. Like people notice that I mostly refer of, like, it almost seems as if I hated Anglo-Saxon culture. This is absolutely untrue. I already answered this in other videos. I don't. Right. First of all, people who follow me, they're mostly Anglo-Saxon. Never pointed that out to me. I just found out of here. They friendly, amicably, thinking that I'm a criticizer of this, that greater background. But it's not really the traditional essence of the Anglo-Saxon culture. If anything, it's degeneration, which is another thing. That is a type of content I want to make, perhaps the single most important. The other one, honestly, has been buzzing in my mind for quite a while, concerning the necessity, for example, of extending manualistic history to at least the Greeks and the Hellenistic era in general, than modern and contemporary history, at least. That's something I've always said no to myself, essentially because I'm not. It's not that I couldn't make actually good videos about the topic, but it always would feel as if I were, first of all, diluting too much the military historical content, which actually is the most important, because that's again what I do for a living. And it's extremely useful for me, yes, to learn also this other stuff, but mostly to stick to the fact that I'm a military historian, to improve myself through that on Schwerpunkt. Also because, of course, as a humble medievalist, I don't really have that plenitude of notionism that would make, I think, a YouTube channel interesting if I started talking about simply modern contemporary. It depends. I've never tried, honestly. I suspect that I would be good at it, at least as much as I am for medieval history, but I'm concerned, especially by the contemporary part, meaning how people would... It's a challenge. I'm concerned because I'm challenged, and that's something I like, because I'm actually a competitive person, somewhat by nature, right? But again, looking at too many secularized or secularistically presented topics, especially about 20th century history, wouldn't make me very... I would probably be quite heated, opinionated about certain things, and of course, not more than you have ever listened to me. After all, I made a video about titled "The Soviet Abomination of Mankind," which I think is quite telling overall. But that, I swear that is interesting to watch. I would love to do that again. I would perhaps this is the interesting part. There are some branches of the cycle that, as we were saying, are getting extinguished. All right, so I have the chance to replenish the content, where or another, and it depends on which one it is, how much it takes, etc. So I'm not entirely, let's say, I can't quite predict even how long simply it's going to take, because this is about also deciding to stick to it, because I'm not feeling like starting a cycle, and say a branch of the cycle and not finishing it. And this stuff is going to last for years, right? So I have to find the right material, I have to make it right for the purpose, and it's all something experimental so far concerning the topic. Again, I'm not scared. Actually, as you know, I have, especially from last year, started something really more serious and interesting about modern warfare, especially in a doctrinal sense. We talked about certain aspects of the 30 Years' War. We talked about the early US Army, for example. We talked about something about the Armada, Tudor strategy. We talked about it's an interesting miniseries about Frederick the Great's Prussian infantry. And there's really a lot. Recently, I talked more about the Dutch during the 80 Years' War. And it's Emilia, right? So there is really a lot of stuff, but that I treated not as part of the cycle, but as part of specials, which I, in fact, dedicated to. We've seen, for example, Charles X, Sweden invasion of Poland and Denmark. And I want to expand especially that. We talk about Maurice de Saxe, There's a lot of French military history to make. We talk about the Sun King, the Langsknecht, so you understand it's sort of varied, it's sort of relevant. I want to make something about World War the First, the immediate post-World War the First, things like the Freikorps, for example. So there is really a lot in the oven, and I don't know when I can deliver this to you. I want to have a safe reserve of pre-paired videos, and then sort of introducing these other chapters. Like also the history of religion is going to be at least introduced as specials. Then I'm thinking about making something more serial. I have, for example, very bold but potentially very successful content about sex in tradition. That's crazy, actually, and I have I have some worry because of you. I don't care about monetization more than much. I mean, if they demonetize it to me because there is, I don't know, sex in the title, so it's not dirty stuff. Like it's actually a serious metaphysical religious take on tradition and sex and so on. It's really interesting and very powerful, but I have to be a bit careful with maybe the bot can spot as, because I care about the channel, of course, but I don't think there is such risk after all, because you hear crazy stories about YouTube, but never know at this point, especially if the channel becomes large. There are greater chances that also thanks to your support, YouTube will have an eye of regard in case of accidents, like a random algorithm. And have some mini series dedicated. I was thinking even about history of racism. Yeah, that would be tough, but cool. I have in mind several different things, but so far, actually, the most at-hand thing that I can especially experiment with would be more modern and contemporary warfare. I want to see how it works, because if it works at that military level, I think there are chances to integrate even the manualistic stuff, and that could be a great page of Schwerpunkt. I don't know whether, because my impression is, telling you the truth, that for how much you follow and like my medieval history content, people would be much more attracted by the later one. For example, when I make modern warfare, modern history, people tend to flock. Like there is some potential. It's not awoken yet, and I need to test your reactions. I don't make things like, I don't know, surveys or announcements through the comment, that there is a section on YouTube. You can't do that. I don't want to harass you with this sort of unwanted posts. That would be an idea, but I also don't need to actually engage with YouTube so too much. Like I mean, what I do is already important and sort of safe in the progression that I'm content with how it's going. Naturally, if you have any suggestion, I'm always open for it. I do not really see other major topics. I had started couple of years ago a series on medieval I said medieval because I started a series on medieval whatever, and no, actually I meant literally a series about the Vietnam War, right? And I made the first couple of videos, then I stopped it because yes, that's the phase. I had to re-upload everything, and then actually with first the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, and especially the war in Ukraine, I sort of, okay, that's not like the right moment to because I'm not scared to say what I think openly, but I don't want to get the impression, because that's how unfortunately things happen on YouTube with audiences that are ever larger, etc., that you make a video about, say, we talk about the Vietnam War, and lots of people are going to see that just, you see the guy wants to talk about the Americans that lose a war, like as if anybody won the Vietnam War, by the way. And actually it would be a chance also to defend, for that matter, say, the broader Western point in that context. The point is, however, that again, I also prefer not to. Yeah, I thought just recently to actually make some videos about Ukraine, about the war, and to, because I followed it from intensely, like there is all a background. I won't say what I was about to do in 2014, also because I didn't do it, but I had a heavy interest in the local affairs, and it's sort of like I could have literally, like, every day made a report of what was going on the field. I could have become like those analysts who literally tell you every day what's going on, making independent analysis. Maybe at this point it would have become, I don't know, maybe I would have had hundreds of thousands of followers, I don't know. I didn't do it because, aside from the fact that I do not have a background in analysis and sort of preferred to, I do as a military historian, actually I have it pretty pronounced for my field and time, but let's say there would have been a lagging time to adapt to the contemporary terminology in English, whatever. It would have been easy. Again, it's not that difficult to talk about the war in Ukraine, at a serious level, because I think I got to that point. The point, though, is that I would have had to transform my channel into something that I've not prepared to, in the sense that I didn't study for, I didn't make my life about, right? Even though this war is so important, and also for however it's gonna go. Like, my sense is that I should have been, I don't know, a contemporary military historian. I should have been much more involved, say, in international policy, right? I should have had some other face. I should have probably put myself out there in a very different way. I understand that Schwerpunkt is sort of discreet, right? There isn't this great deal of I don't know. I decided to remain behind the scenes because just like with occult, right? My main bet is that when things work, they succeed, right? When things are right, they succeed. When they're good, they succeed. There is no doubt in my mind. So the paths to the truth are really as many as we are, right? And so it's all on us to do it with our means. Naturally, this doesn't mean that I couldn't branch into some other affair. Like, I could give you, I don't know, a Ukraine war update every month, let's say, right? Or every 2 weeks or something like that. But even that would place me in a context, especially on YouTube, where people are not here exactly to listen to an accurate analysis or to try to listen to one specific point, but they're just much into being from one side or another, and I don't like that at all. I know it's not an excuse, it's not a valid excuse, but at the same time, again, the channel, I think, should maintain the focus on, let's say, what is important as far as the war is how much you're willing to learn the history that I upload, right? You may think about medieval Tyrol, what's the point of that? Or the Atlantic merchantman. It's all about that. this is the actual secret of Schwerpunkt, that if you get into that, if you get the whole thing, you will be able to get autonomously somewhere else. And again, I personally could do more, so every limit is on me, but I decided to bet on this, also for reasons that I can't extensively discuss now, also because the video is tremendously long. Reason for which I really think this is pretty much all. If in general I were to say what I would like to talk about in this channel that I don't, I honestly, like instinctively, I would like to talk much more about what the theme of this channel should have been. I think properly military historical analysis, full stop, right? Like studying every single, I don't know, every single battle of the American Civil War, or the same with World War II, with anything, especially modern times, something more, something closer, something more relatable, something more, right? Instead, even though I consider primarily myself as a military historian, I realize that giving context also about broader historical topics is very, very important. There is a minimal consideration for those of you who are not interested exclusively in military history, or those who don't really understand it or think that I just talk about it incidentally. That's instead all I do, and Schwerpunkt in some ways is the mean I use again to boost my own critical skills rather than necessarily focusing on the topics that I should. I have this sort of very treasuring character in which I say, well, okay, I will do this evening, like this other topic. It may not be what I really need tomorrow, but that I have already prepared for, like in a satisfactory way for the conventional purpose that I have for. But it will do, right? Everything will do, and that sort of makes sense, right? I don't know where, because over the years, the same cycle changed. Like, it wasn't always the same. The current one is a very mature form, but it's obvious that aside from the various branches that are going to die out, there's also like a general choice. Like for example, some of you asked me, as I said before, like how how do you do it? How long does it take really to do this stuff? Well, I can say that compared to before, it's much easier to make videos, but much easier. It's it takes less time, takes less effort. It's like just easier to process the information, to find it, to store it, to elaborate it, to present it. So the logical consequence is that this thing, yes, may reach some sort of standard peak of some sort, but the impression is that I'm simply expanding my capabilities over time, and there is no trace of it to decline at the moment. So considering also what I do in parallel to Schwerpunkt, with Schwerpunkt, I trust that we will arrive at the point at which I can make a video about, like it seems today, like of course about these different topics without problem, but it will be much more dedicated, strictly speaking, to military history. And so to consolidate the channel along this basis, because so far it's mostly about medieval history, or at least it seems so, right? Even if there is a evidently strong, very strong military historical bias, it does seem it's sort of more historical than strictly military. I would like to increase the military side of the story. And again, there's a great building, a great construction. I have to do this without unbalancing it. And again, it's possible, it's feasible. It's not really like a prohibited thing, but we have to do it in a way that also, in fact, I can adapt to gradually, and believe me, that is not something it changes from a day to another. The cycle helps a lot to stabilize, to pave the way, to say, okay, like you have some certain basics, it's just routine, and then you can build something more over it. But on the other hand, like it also shifts you towards certain other directions depending on the random topics that you're going to point out, and that's actually the way you can. I think it's positive, like it's not negative at all, because it, thanks to this self-enforced choice, I managed to discuss topics that I didn't think even would be so interesting out there, because if I had had to choose just autonomously, I would have just concentrated my attention towards certain things but ignored others. The cycle instead forced me to talk about things that I don't really, I would have not touched anyway, and also opened me to concepts that I would have not acquired otherwise. So I don't think this is going to bring to any sort of revolution or anything in my thought, in my choices, whatever, historically speaking, but it also allowed me to see things in a different way, and so I hope that the way the channel grows and the content gets refined is very functional and serves also your interest, for that matter. So yes, to make the long story short, this is just simply the way I pick topics, and I don't I'm freed of the embarrassment of choosing so straightly, right? And that's quite relevant after all. And again, things would change. I know that change is not the thrilling in line of just hearing about it, but the changes have been smooth on Schwerpunkt, and they have been gradual, they've been motivated. It's never been like the channel has stayed loyal to its mission, and that's in fact or something that after almost 6 years of continued videos, like I think has also tradition to rest on, right? So this Schwerpunkt is 6 years old now. It's going to the first grade, right? And so let's make it grow further and see what happens. You can understand how much can be achieved. There are novelties here and there. You will probably see them coming. I anticipated some of that, but also this other tendencies naturally open to especially specials. But I don't know, I made an interview recently, for example, and so nothing glamorous, but there is a channel of hundreds of thousands that is going to release that, so I think that it could be like an interesting side of the story. For the rest, I will not update you on the channel's trends. I just thank you for all the support. I will keep making the question and answer series again. I don't do it often, but it's a break. Sometimes it's useful. It allows me to say all this, to talk with you a bit more directly. For today, however, I stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. As always, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.